All right, we will start then. Welcome everyone to Let's Build a REST API with NestJS and Prisma. So I will be your host, Tasin. I am a developer advocate at Prisma. So this workshop comes with a few documents. The Notion document that you're looking at is available in this URL, res.ly day22 NestJS. I will share this in the chat one more time if anyone needs it. And if you go here, you'll find the rest of the links that you need, mainly the NestJS documentation and the GitHub repository. Okay, so the GitHub repository might be useful because once we finish a lesson, we'll give everyone some time to code along and catch up and do all the code that was done during a particular lesson. And if for whatever reason you're unable to finish in the given time, you can just use the repo to check out the appropriate branch. So there's a branch for the beginning of every lesson. So you can just check out the branch that we are going to start next and continue along. And this document contains all the instructions for running almost everything that I'm going to be showing you during the workshop. So if you fail to understand a certain concept or are just behind for any reason, you don't have to fret. You can use this document after the workshop to catch up with anything that you did not understand or you just didn't have time to do. In terms of prerequisites, you need to have Node.js and NPM installed. And also Docker and Docker Compose are necessary for setting up Postgres instance. Ideally, I would recommend that you use Docker for the Postgres because otherwise your connection strings might be different from mine, which might be a bit confusing to debug. But if for whatever reason you don't have Docker and Docker Compose, that's also fine. I'll give you a quick workaround. Basic familiarity with NestJS is recommended, but it's not necessary because I will try to explain every concept that we need for this workshop. But just out of curiosity, how many people here have used NestJS before, even once? You can just raise your hand, and folks at Quinoa, you can just like physically raise your hand if you would. Okay, a few hands. Not cool. Very cool. But lots of people also haven't used NestJS before, which is also totally fine. One more quick poll. How many people here have used Prisma before, for at least once?
Today.
Today. Okay, yeah, that'll do. You're basically a pro at this point. No worries. So yeah, again, lots of hands, but some people haven't either. But again, that's also fine. So if you haven't, by the way, if you're using VS Code, I would strongly recommend installing the Prisma extension. It's really nice and gives you great highlighting and syntax highlighting and a lot of other nice stuff. So in this workshop, we will be building a backend REST API. This is a Medium clone and it's called Median. And I'm very, very proud of that name. So I mention it every time. So we will be covering a few things. In lesson 1, we'll be setting everything up. This means Postgres, Prisma, NestJS, and Swagger. In the second lesson, we'll start building out the REST API. In lesson 3, we'll do input validation for our API. In lesson 4, we'll handle errors. And finally, we'll do end-to-end testing or API testing. There's instructions for each lesson. Each has its own page. And we will try to time box all the lessons, but this is mostly like on a best effort basis. There's no guarantee we'll be able to hit these time boxes. If we can't, that's also totally fine. We might have to skip lesson 5 at the end in the worst case. But again, you can just follow the document down the line if we can't do it in the workshop. And there will be 2 parts to every lesson. The host walkthrough is when I code and you watch and listen and try to understand. And then you'll get dedicated time to actually do it yourself. And you can use the documents to see the code and run all the code. So, but again, I would strongly recommend that you try to code as much as you can yourself. But if for whatever reason you do need to copy paste, go for it. But I think you'll learn best if you try to write everything. There's this quick Notion tip to expand all the toggles, which is where the code hides. And if you have any questions, online folks, you can use the Q&A section in Zoom. Quinoa folks, during the practice time, just raise your hands and I will try to answer your questions. Or yeah, I think that'll work best. Yeah, okay, so that's it. I will start first with a quick introduction to NestJS, but at least a few concepts. NestJS is a opinionated backend Node.js framework. It uses Express under the hood. You can also use it with Fastify, but we'll be using Express. It's kind of similar to Angular in its architecture. It's somewhat it's more opinionated than and it comes up with like a lot of its own libraries. It's more batteries included than Express or Koa or some of these other node frameworks that you might be more familiar with. Some useful concepts. A module is a basically it's a unit of it's logical separation. It's a way to group logically structurally like group things together that are related in functionality, like say data access or like a CRUD endpoint or whatever. And there's a app module, which is like called the root module, and that's what starts your application. And modules can be shared with two other modules. So other modules can import modules for their functionality and stuff. Controller defines REST endpoints. Each controller can have one or more route handlers that can correspond to each route in that endpoint. And this should be fairly implicit by this diagram. Clients give requests and some controller tries to handle it. And services are basically just units to isolate business logic. One module can have more than one service. And another concept that's kind of related is called a provider. And if you think provider, just think service, because a service is a subset of what providers are. So, okay, that's all. We will get right to it. So in the first lesson, we'll be setting everything up. Nest comes with a very nice CLI, which you can use to do a lot of things, including starting a project. And we can use that CLI to get started with our project. So this is the command you run to get build, scaffold, and NestJS project. And choose npm as your package manager when you do. And it will start and install everything. It'll create a folder called Median wherever you are in your machine. And that's how you can get started. Alternatively, you can clone lesson 1 begin from the Git repo I just mentioned. And it's the same thing. It's just this done and pushed to GitHub. I have actually done exactly that and set everything up already and installed the node modules. So I will just use that. And okay, so just to give you a quick overview of how the code is structured, there's a source folder where all the actual code resides. There's a test folder where we'll do the end-to-end testing or API testing. And everything else is pretty straightforward. Prettier, ESLint, tsconfig, and NestJS just natively uses TypeScript. So the first thing we're going to do, and oh, okay, so this is the app module that I mentioned, which is responsible for starting the application. So, okay. And we can start the server by doing this command, npm run start dev. And right now it's empty project. It's not doing much. I'll just show you. Yeah, okay, just a hello world. So that's it. And I'll just keep that running all the time. It will reload whenever there's changes, which is pretty cool. And the first thing we're going to do is create a Postgres instance. And the way we do that is by creating a Docker compose file. And that Docker compose file will have this configuration that's given in the document. I'm not going to type this. It's just a copy paste. It will create a Docker instance inside some Linux distro, I don't know. And it's going to put the username and password as Postgres. So I will use this command, docker compose up, to get this started. And this will take a bit more time for you if you don't have Postgres 13.5, which you likely don't. And again, if you do not have Docker Compose, that's fine. You can use SQLite as your database, and I will show you where the instructions for that are in the document. I will not be coding that myself. But you can just use the alternative code that's already provided. Just copy paste that when you do it yourself. Okay, so Docker is ready. The next thing we're going to do is set up Prisma. And to do that, I need to install the Prisma CLI as a dev dependency. And once that's done, we are going to initialize Prisma. And the way that works is with the Prisma init command. And this created two things. It created a schema, Prisma schema file for us, and it created an environment file for us. We're going to be using both. But first, let's define the environment file. So, okay, just 1 second, please. Yeah, okay. So the environment file, and here we are going to, sorry, yeah, okay, I'm just doing that. Okay, so here we're going to copy paste the environment string that's given in the Notion doc, and it's just using the standard Prisma connection format. If you are using SQLite, your database URL will differ. Warning, use the Notion to figure out what that is. Okay, now we are going to the schema file. Here we have a data source, it's Postgres, and it's going to point to that database URL environment variable we just defined. And now what we are going to do is create a Prisma model, which is the Prisma schema definition of your database tables. And we are going to define a model called article. It's going to have an ID, which is an integer. The ID this option says this is a primary key, and we're gonna use default auto increment. I have Copilot on. If that's annoying for any reason for anyone, just let me know. I'll turn it off. But it's kind of magic and really amazing in my opinion. So yeah, and I'm going to put description, body, string, published. Okay, so what published is, it's a Boolean flag that says whether this article is in draft mode or it's been published. It's just a flag, nothing else. Created at and updated at. And I think this should be fairly straightforward. This option, the default option, specifies defaults if you don't provide it automatically. Updated at is a bit different. This updated at option will basically update this field whenever there's a change to the article model. And that kind of Prisma will handle that for us automatically. And titles are unique. Okay, so now what we are going to do is run a migration. And what a migration does is it will generate the underlying SQL for creating the table article inside our database. So the way we can run that is using the Prisma migrate command. Prisma migrate dev.
Tasin, I have a question. Don't you need the default on updated at as well?
Sorry?
Don't you need the default now on updated at as well?
Otherwise, oh, no, it kind of does that automatically. It will, when the article is created, it will default now, or it will basically initialize updated at as the same value as created at. And if you make changes down the line, it will only update updated at.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so we just ran the migrate command. We gave it the name init. And I have some data in this database, so that's why it's telling me to, if I'm okay with resetting, but you should not see that. You should just be able to run it. And we have some vulnerabilities, but we'll just ignore that for now. So this created this migration folder, and this is the SQL needed to generate the model to our actual database. So this is what the migrate command actually ran. And it also generated the Prisma client for us. So the Prisma client is actually the TypeScript API that you will use to actually run queries against your database. It's the query builder of Prisma in a way. So the next thing we're going to do is run seeding. So currently our database is empty and we want to populate it with some data so we can actually mess around with our API down the line. And to do that, we are going to create a seed script first, and we are going to call it CTS. And this is a very straightforward TypeScript file, and we are going to import Prisma here. Okay, you know what? I'll just let VS Code figure it out. Yeah, okay. So let's create a function called main. And what we're going to do is we are going to run two upsert queries, and an upsert is basically an update or insert. And I'm going to just copy paste some data first because it's a lot of text and I don't want to write it myself. And I will explain what it's doing. So, okay. So basically what an upsert does is it will try to find something in the database with that matches the where condition. Here it's the title. If it already exists, it will try to update it. In this case, it won't update because we're not putting anything in update. Otherwise, it will try to create. And the reason we're using an upsert instead of a create is because if we accidentally run the seed script twice, so that there's no errors or duplicate data. And I'm going to create another upsert. So, oops. And again, just copy paste. Hey, my Control C is not working, weird. Huh? Sorry, technical difficulties. Yeah, okay. So this is the second article. Yeah, I'll just close the terminal because it's taking up a lot of screen real estate. And finally, we are just going to log these to the console. Okay, so now we want to actually run this main function. We will try to catch any errors. Console.error. Okay. And in case there is an error, we'll exit with a non-zero code. All right. And finally, since this is a very short-lived script, we will explicitly tell Prisma to disconnect. This is normally not something you have to do in your application, but it is something that needs to be done if you are like initializing Prisma in some kind of short script. So, okay, so this is the seed script. It's just running the main function, which creates these two posts for us. And the way we can get this to run automatically is to configure something in the package.json under the Prisma key. So we are going to define a Prisma key, and inside we're going to define the seed key. So prisma.seed. And here I can run any arbitrary script, and that will basically be, yeah, okay. We have a question. I'll get to that in a minute. So we're just going to run TS node, and that will run the seed script. So we can run any arbitrary script here, but obviously we can do anything really. It's just a shell file, and Prisma will just run that shell command basically. And so now if we do this Prisma command, npx prisma db seed, it's going to run this. So TS node, it created the two articles for us. We can verify this in Prisma Studio, which is this GUI to interact with your database. Okay. So we have two articles. Right, yeah. So those are the two articles. Tanya asked when exactly you'd use Prisma Disconnect. Any kind of short-lived script, basically. If you're running like an application web server, you don't need to do this. It's because then Prisma has enough time to kind of handle the shutdown and stuff. And there's more information on this in our documentation. I will send that to you in a moment during the Q&A practice time. So, okay, now we have some data in our database. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is, I'll just open another shell file. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is initialize Prisma inside NestJS. And the way we can do that is by creating a Prisma module. And again, the NestJS CLI makes this really easy. So we generated a Prisma module, and next we're going to generate a Prisma service. So again, remember, services live inside modules, and service is where the business logic is. So let's just define the Prisma service first. Extends Prisma client. Okay, that's really all you need to do to implement the Prisma service. It's just extending the Prisma client, which has all the Prisma API stuff. For NestJS, I would recommend doing this other thing. It's just a copy paste. I'm sorry. For whatever reason, I cannot seem to be able to copy properly here. Anyways, this is something that's explained in the NestJS docs. The summary is Prisma and Nest lifecycle don't play well together. So if you should register this this hook to close the application when Prisma closes. It's not something you really have to worry about. Just copy paste it. More information in the docs that's linked in the Notion doc if you want to find out more about this, but we're not going to go into too much details. Okay, so this is the Prisma service, but remember, services live inside modules, and if you want to export the Prisma service, you'll be using the Prisma module. And since this is a service that you export, you will be doing this export. Yeah, so what this means is the Prisma module has one provider. Again, provider is a service. There's more providers, but for our context, they're more or less similar. And this provider can be exported when you import this module to another module. That's kind of a common pattern in NestJS, and it's something you'll be doing quite frequently when you do make Nest applications. So just letting you know in advance. Again, you'll see what I mean in just a minute. The last thing we're going to do is set up Swagger. And Swagger is a documentation tool for REST APIs. It's really awesome. It gives you this nice, well-documented web UI for your REST API, and we'll see what that's like in just a moment. So to use it, we need to install the NestJS Swagger package as well as this Swagger UI Express, because again, we're using Express under the hood. And to initialize Swagger, what we need to do is create a Swagger document. So uses the builder pattern, and we need to set the title. We'll call it median. We'll need to set a description, which is the median API. And we'll set the version to 0.1. Finally, just build. Oh, okay, this is a string, sorry. Okay, so is there a repo where we can find the finished application? Yes, it's the main branch in the linked Notion document, in the GitHub in the linked Notion document. So the next thing is, okay, yeah, that actually. So basically what this is doing is it's creating a Swagger module. It's binding it to the application instance and the config together. And then we mention the endpoint we want this documented. Okay, that's it. And right, let me just do this. It should be in the end. Okay, and now if our NestJS application is still running, we can go and just check out the API endpoint. There's a few questions. I'll get to those in a minute. And we just have this get endpoint. That's the hello world endpoint that we kind of saw a while ago. Just a heads up, some people might, when you generate resources, the running Nest application might crash. In that case, just run npm run pre-build. It's this pre-build command, and that will, and then just reset the web server, and that should fix it. Okay, so that is lesson 1. We have set up NestJS, Prisma, Postgres, and Swagger. We are going to give you, I want to say 5 to 10 minutes. I'll give you 8 minutes actually to finish this. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to raise that in Q&A, and I will also go through any questions anyone has. Okay, so I will answer some of the questions in the meantime. And by the way, if you have questions, please raise it in the Q&A so it's a bit more structured. Otherwise, the chat gets a bit blurred. That's all right. So the main branch is the final application that was asked by Alessio. So is there a specific benefit to writing seed data in TypeScript instead of SQL files and syntax? Well, the main benefit is that you don't have to write SQL basically. One of the main reasons a lot of people use ORMs is, again, because they don't like writing SQL, or it's slower to write SQL than writing it in TypeScript. So that's one of the main benefits. Another is the seed command kind of integrates well into the entire Prisma ecosystem. So when you run a migrate, it will automatically seed things for you. Again, it's not that there's anything that Prisma will do that you can't do in SQL, because again, in the end, it is just generating SQL for you. But it's generally just easier for a lot of people to do things in TypeScript. So yeah, again, it's the type hinting, it's the developer experience kind of thing. So, okay, Tane asked about disconnect. I will link the document. Okay, Tane, you can find your link in the answered section of the Q&A. Okay, so can you make different seeds for different use cases, like test data versus initial prod data? I am not totally sure. Technically, so yes, technically you can, because basically what this is just in an arbitrary script, right? So you could probably do like mention the environment variable maybe. My gut feeling is you can, but I'm not exactly sure what the logistics are. So you can probably just, since the Prisma schema is basically just an environment variable. So if you just connect to a prod database, again, I'm not 100% sure. So you can probably write some shell file to figure this out, how to do this properly, but I think you should be able to. But in general, the seed command is mainly meant for development, for convenience in development. Initializing production data is probably not something that you'll be doing frequently. So maybe it's not necessary to be doing this inside, like using this setup. You can just run that manually. But yeah, again, I'm not totally sure how you could exactly do this, but my gut feeling is you probably can. But again, Seed is mainly for development databases. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, even if you could figure it out. So anonymous attendee asked, how would you split a file with multiple Prisma queries for different endpoints? Could you kind of clarify a bit? If you have Prisma queries in different endpoints, you basically just import your Prisma service to those files, because the service is basically a singleton. It's one Prisma client instance that you're just sharing around. And you could just, once you have access to this Prisma service, you can run your queries with the Prisma client, and Prisma figures out in what order to run them, and it handles the connection pooling and management stuff for you. I'm not sure if exactly that's the question you asked, but if you need any clarifications, let me know. And importing the Prisma service is something that we're going to see in like a minute. So in the seed script, we didn't actually use the Prisma service. This is standalone. It's not using Nest. So we initialized the Prisma client. But inside the application, we're not going to do that. We're going to use the Prisma service all the time. Okay, so if you're using something like Express instead of Nest, again, you'll create a singleton instance of the Prisma client, kind of like this, and then export that instance, and then you'll basically just you'll do something like this, I guess. Wow, I forgot the syntax exactly, but yeah, you just I think it's export Prisma. Whatever, it's more, you just export Prisma, and you import that file and use it. It's basically just create a singleton. In Express, you do it the normal way for JavaScript, TypeScript, and in Nest, you use the module service thing. Okay, so there are a few more questions, but we'll get to that later, because we will start the next chapter, next lesson in just a bit. Again, I apologize if the time you're getting is a little limited, but if you can just use these, the Notion document to follow along down the line if you are forced to skip anything, and just check out to the appropriate lesson. And but I think another thing you could possibly do is just try to copy paste if you are too behind. But again, I don't recommend it. But yeah, again, sorry, we are a bit stretched for time. All right, so the next lesson is about REST APIs. We are going to build the create, read, update, and delete endpoints for the article model, and some accompanying business logic. So if you are not ready, just check out the lesson branch and get started, or just, yeah, figure it out. So the first thing we are going to do is generate a resource, and a resource is just, so there's lots of kinds of resources, and we are going to generate one for a REST API. So let me just show you what that looks like. Again, the CLI makes this super easy. Resource. And we are going to call it the articles resource. This is a REST API endpoint, and we want CRUD endpoints. So it generated a ton of things for us, and we are going to go over all of them in a bit. But the main two things we need is, again, this has its own module, and it has its service and controller. But we'll start with the module, because the first thing we want to do is import the Prisma module to this article module, because we're going to need it to run queries. So the way we do that is Okay, so just 1 second, please. Okay, the way we need to do that is we will add the Prisma module as an import. So that's basically the syntax for importing modules. And since the Prisma module lists Prisma service as an export, and you just imported the Prisma module, you actually are able to use the Prisma service inside this module. So we are going to need it inside the article service, and this is where some of the queries will reside and a lot of the business logic. So the way you get another external service is you initialize it inside the constructor, and Prisma will, NestJS will kind of inject the Prisma instance for you inside. So this is using the dependency injection pattern, and that's something that NestJS strongly advocates for. So yeah, okay, so Prisma service, all right. And now we're going to go ahead and start implementing the routes. And the article controller already has all these route handlers written. So these are basically correspond to like different endpoints inside articles. And we can actually see this inside our Swagger page now. So Nest generated this for us using Swagger. Right now, the implementations are all dummy implementations, so it just returns a string. But let's just take a look at what's going on here. We are basically just returning the corresponding function from the article service. So that's where we're going to write all the business logic. So we'll start with find all. And the first query we're going to write is basically going to return all published articles. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. So basically find all returns all articles where published is equals to true. We can already test this endpoint, and yeah, there's only one published article right now. It returns an array. So next we are going to create a similar endpoint, but this one is for draft articles. So let's call it find all drafts. So this will also use the article service. And this function does not exist yet, but we're gonna get to it in just a minute. And we'll just, so this will be article/drafts. And we're gonna implement this function in service now. And this will be basically an identical query with just published as false. So again, let's check this out. We refresh this page and we have the drafts page. And we get the false article or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of how the get endpoints. Oh, okay. So there's another get endpoint, which is for getting articles by their ID. So if you have some dynamic part in your path, like some parameter that's in the URL itself, like say get articles/2 or something, which is for getting specific articles, you can use that, like you can define that as a colon, and NestJS will parse that part of the URL for you and return it as a string. But if you remember, IDs are numbers in our schema, so we cast that to a number first before sending it to the article service. And we are going to define this function now, which is going to run a find unique. And Prisma has great syntax, like a very strong typed API, so it can like give you really nice suggestions. And so here you're running a find unique where ID equals to this. And now we should be able to get this endpoint as well. So yeah, we can get single articles here, but one problem right now is if we put invalid data here, it just returns nothing because the find unique doesn't raise any errors. It just returns an empty object. So we're going to fix that right now by doing some error handling. So let's go to the controller, and for find one, we need these functions async first, because article await. Okay, so what we're going to do is if the article is not available, if it's empty, we are going to do something here. But if it's available, we just return it. But if it's not available, what we do is we create a NestJS built-in exception called the not found exception. So return new not found exception. Let's give it a nice error message. Yep, that's the message we want. So this workshop is brought to you by Tasin and GitHub Copilot. So yeah, so not found exception. Okay. Return article. Yeah, okay. So now if we do the same thing, we get a night. Oh, sorry. Oh, I think that's throw it, not return it. Yeah, okay. So status code is 404 message. Yeah, get the idea. The next endpoint we're going to do is post, which is for creating articles. And okay, so that is defined here. And here you'll see it takes an body argument, which is just the post body, like the JSON you put in the body itself. And the type is create article DTO. DTO stands for data transfer object. And this is just a Nest convention or idiom for defining objects that are basically traveling over the network or traveling from like one place in your application to another. So it's for defining those shapes, and we are going to define that right now. We want a title, a description. Description is optional. A body, and a published Boolean. And the default value of this Boolean is false. Okay, so in order to generate Swagger documentation for this, you need to use certain Swagger decorators that NestJS provides. And for here, we just say this is an API property, and Swagger will document it for us automatically. So, okay. API property, and this one is you have to provide an extra false. The reason you need to do this is because the TypeScript types are not available at runtime or something like that. So right, this is a create article DTO. It's defined now, so we can go back to the controller. And the controller is pretty much implemented. We just implement this function. So here we are going to run another Prisma query. And the data is the create article DTO. Okay, so right, so we can try this endpoint now. Don't want to try an empty endpoint. Okay, so yeah, again, this is giving me a schema of what it looks like because we defined the create article DTO. So I can just try and execute this. And yeah, you have a new article in your API. The next endpoint is patch or update, and update is for updating your article, and this takes an ID along with the update article DTO. And the cool thing about update article is it's defined as a partial type of create article, and it just gets defined automatically. It's any subset of create article is fine as an update article. And we define this in the service. update. So in an update, you need to mention where, which is what article you want to update, and data, which is the update article DTO. Yeah, okay. So that's update. That should also work now. Let's try to update article 3, which is defined. Let's make string into string 2. And yeah, you just updated an article. The next is finally delete, and this is the remove endpoint. Again, we don't really need to touch the delete the controller, just we get the ID, we cast it, we send it to remove. Where ID. Okay, let's get rid of that article we just created. So it's 3. And yeah, so this just got rid of that article. Okay, so that's the endpoints. We have defined all of them now. We are going to do some quality of life improvements with Swagger. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to add this API tags decorator to our controller. And what this does will be obvious in just a second. So once we do this and we go back to Swagger, I think the server didn't reset. API tags, articles. Oh, that's a bit weird, but okay, I am not sure what's going on here, but oh, sorry, right, I'm defining an article service. Oops. Should go here. Right, so if I do this, yeah, so it just sort of bundled all the endpoints together for me, which was not that useful right now, but when there's like hundreds of endpoints, super useful. And we're going to do one final thing, which let me show you right now. Right now, there's no response types documented for any of the endpoints, so we are going to define that. And to define that, we are going to use this article entity, which is currently empty. And an article entity is just going to define the shape of the article in our application layer. And conveniently for us, this shape is the same as the shape of article that Prisma defines. So we just use import article from Prisma. One second. From here, it's add a read of Prisma / client. Yeah. Okay, so this is a type that Prisma defines for us. We use this to define this article entity type. And if it implements that type, you need to do some, yeah, okay. So we want all of this in this article type. The only difference is description should be a string or null. Okay, once again, we need to use the API decorator properties, API property decorators to make these available to Swagger. And description is not required. And it is nullable. Okay, now if we go back to our Swagger documentation and refresh it. Okay, sorry, I need to do one more thing. So we have the article entity defined. We need to specify what the responses are in the controller for each route. And the way we do this is with another decorator. So NestJS really loves its decorators. Right, so type article entity. So for the post, we return a single article. We'll do the gets in a bit because those return arrays. Okay, we just yeah. So the find all and find all drafts returns an array of articles. Okay, so now if we go back, we have these nice examples response types defined for us. And that is the end for lesson 2. We defined the CRUD endpoints, and we also defined Swagger types for all of them. So now it will be the coding portion and code for yourself portion. I will answer questions in the Q&A. And just to like sort of digest what we've been doing, Nest uses this sort of a controller pattern for defining REST endpoints. And it basically uses decorators a lot for any kind of cross-cutting concern. And what I mean by cross-cutting concern is anything that's not related to just handling the route endpoint. So for things like Swagger type generation, for things like validation, which we'll get to in a bit, for things like data pre-processing, a lot of that is done using decorators. So this makes it declarative, but you don't have to like make the route handlers all bloated with like a lots of if conditions and checks for everything. So that's kind of like the common pattern in NestJS. And the other common NestJS pattern we learned about is the module import kind of thing. Again, just look at how this import thing works for a bit. Look at the docs. So it'll become very natural. So again, please continue writing. You will get 10 minutes for this chapter. And again, if you have any questions or are stuck with anything, just Q&A, or for the Quinoa folks, just raise your hands. Oh, okay, so if there's any issues with indexing, at least in VS Code for the Prisma generated types, one of the things you can do is open up the command palette and restart the TS server. So what this does, it runs the TypeScript compiler again, and it sort of indexes all the types, and it does all of that, it redoes it. So sometimes VS Code doesn't pick up the updated types, and that helps a lot. So, all right, so another question is, yeah, so someone asked about like further abstracting the endpoints. It's something you can probably do with like decorators and stuff. It's something I know TypeORM does. You can define entities and generic entities, and you can mention the actual database model at runtime or something like that. So that's not something that I would recommend doing with Prisma. In general, I would suggest writing the code for different models separately. So it's probably, I have seen some people trying to do this, but it's really hard to get the types right if you're using generics in this, like in that kind of setup. And a simpler thing you could probably do is probably create some kind of database interface, and that's where you write all your queries. And you could probably structure that in a way where basically all your reads or writes or all your database queries go through the database interface. So it's kind of similar to what article services, but more abstract for your data layer. I think it's called like a DAL or something. I forgot what the exact pattern is called, but I have seen people do that in Express. Again, the question is, since it's a bit abstract, I'm not sure if I got it correctly, anonymous attendee, But again, if you have any follow-ups or you need more concrete code, again, because since this is not NestJS specific, I would be happy to talk to you after the workshop. Just feel free to reach out to me. My like Slack handle, Twitter, all of that is available in the Notion doc. Okay, so we are going to start the next chapter, which is input validation. So just to give you an idea of what the motivation behind this is, if we go to our Swagger API, we can do silly things like this right now and create like empty articles. And that's undesirable. We don't want this. And this is to prevent abuse. This is to prevent like malformed data, so errors and stuff. So we are going to add validation to our API. So again, there's a lesson 3 branch you can use. And so before we go into the code, just a quick introduction to the concept of NestJS pipes. So a pipe is basically a kind of like intercept that sits between like your client requests and the route handlers. And pipes can do 2 things. It can, validate your arguments, and it can transform your arguments. And if you transform your arguments, the route handlers will get the transformed arguments that the pipe returns. These are like the 2 main use cases for pipes. And we're going to show you both. So the first is validation. And for validation, Nest actually gives us a pipe, which is called a Nest validation pipe. To use that, though, we will use these 2 packages, class validator and class transformer. These are not NestJS specific. They're more like TypeScript decorator-based validation packages. And we will install them. And the next thing we are going to do is set up the validation pipe. And this will be set up globally. So the validation pipe will be accessible throughout the application. And you can also scope this to like a specific like controller or even a specific route. But for this case, we are going to do this. Use global pipes and new validation pipe. Okay. Right. So that's the validation pipe. So now we are going to create some validation rules for the create article DTO, because that's how data is coming in. And so the class validator package has a lot of built-in validation decorators that we can use. I think this should be 2. Okay. So for example, for title, the first thing we are going to impose is that this is a string. And this needs to have a min length of 5 characters. And this also, yeah, okay, that's it. This should also be a string, but this is optional. And also we want the max length for this to be 300 characters. Description. The body is a string, and Boolean, this is a Boolean. Right, and this is also optional. So that's actually all we have to do. And since we set up the validator automatically, it's just going to do its thing for us. It's going to run that validator, these validation rules everywhere. So we can actually try doing this again, and let's see what happens. Yeah, so we got a error code, and it's telling us the title must be longer than or equal to 5 characters. So yeah, not gonna work anymore. So yeah, so that's validation, and you can set up custom validators, and there's NestJS documentation on that. That's not something we're going to cover in this workshop, but again, you can do like create these decorators for yourself. So the next thing we want to show you is transformation pipes. So the motivation for that is right now these these like dynamic ID path parameters are strings. So they're documented as string inside Swagger. That's because in our controllers, they are defined as strings. That's because NestJS parses them as such from the URLs. But we can use this pipe called a parse int pipe that will fix this for us. So what we need to do is just mention we want to use the parse int pipe, and then we can convert this to a number. So then this isn't necessary. And let's just do this for all of this endpoints. Okay, so now if we go back to Swagger, we should see that these endpoints are defined as numbers. So previously I could send a string here and it would get an error in the at runtime, but now what it's doing is like if I try to put an invalid string, it's complaining immediately, and the validation pipe will complain for us. So basically, yeah, that's pipes in a nutshell. Validation and transformation. And this was a pretty short chapter. We're probably going to not only give you like 5 minutes or so, maybe 4. So this is where you code it along yourself now. Someone asked, will you cover pagination? Unfortunately, that's not something that we will be able to cover in this workshop. But there is another workshop that was about NestJS that was done last year that does cover pagination. So maybe you could try that one out as well. And the link to that is available in additional resources. This one, Prisma Day 2021 workshop. Okay, so the next topic we are going to cover is error handling. And with Nest, Nest has like a dedicated exception filter or an exception handling layer that is responsible for handling any kind of uncaught exceptions. And it has, just to show you what that looks like, let me try to create the same article twice and see what happens. So, okay, the first time it worked, it created the article. And the second time, there's an internal server error. If we go check VS Code, yeah, so here you can see that Prisma raised an error. There was a unique constraint failed on the title field because 2 titles cannot be the same as it's unique. But this was an uncaught exception. So NestJS comes with its like a generic base exception filter. And whenever there's like any uncaught exception, it's just going to give this generic internal server error. But this isn't very user friendly. And also we might want to do extra stuff when we're handling exceptions, like maybe log it or whatever. So you can create dedicated exception filters to handle different kinds of exceptions. And we are going to handle this Prisma client known request error exception type, which one of which is the error we just saw. So the way we do that is first we create a Prisma exception filter. And this is again just the nest generate command. So I'll just copy this. So we're generating a filter and we're calling it Prisma client exception. And this generates the test file, which you're not going to touch, and this exception filter file for us. And here in the catch, we mentioned the exception we want to catch. And okay, so let me just import Prisma first. And the exception is called Prisma client known request error. And so this is not going to be a generic. So let's get rid of that. And we normally exception filters will implement this interface, but we're just going to extend the base exception filter, the one that just gives 500. So we change the exception type to this. Okay, now to actually implement it, the first thing we can do is we can just catch called super, which will just run the base exception filter. So for any uncaught exceptions, it's just going to run that. And the next thing we're going to do is basically create a switch case. And yeah, we're going to try to find the exception code. And based on the code, we are going to basically the exception has these codes. And these are all available in the Prisma documentation. So yeah, so for example, 2002 is the code for unique constraint fill. So that's exception we're trying to catch. Yeah, so case P2002, we are going to do stuff and then break. And let's just write the default case where we do this. Okay, so we want to do a bunch of stuff here. The first thing is kind of generic. So let's just get the host's HTTP context. And this is the sort of HTTP lifecycle object. And from here, we can actually get the response, the object that NestJS will send out. And the message we want to send is basically, yeah, so the message we want to send is just this. That comes with the Prisma exception. And what we'll do is we will modify the response object. The response status will be the conflict status, which is 409. And okay, so it needs to, so this response is basically, 1 second. Right, I need to import response for whatever reason. I think I imported the wrong one. Yeah, okay, so status. And we're also going to change the message we send along with the status. So we'll add a status code, which is basically the same thing. And the message is the one we just defined. So we just modified the response, and this is this modified response will be going to the application now. So if we, okay, so sorry, we can't go back yet. Now we have to actually apply this filter. And so when you're applying filters, you have to scope it. And there's different scopes you can apply this to. You can apply this globally. So whenever there's this Prisma client known request error, this filter will kick in. But we don't want to do that. We'll just scope it to the articles controller. And the way you do that is you just add a use filter decorator and mention that Prisma client exception filter. Yeah. Now, basically, anytime that error, this one run is not handled by the controller, this filter will kick in. So let's just try this out. We can do the same post endpoint again. Right. So yeah, this one. So if we try to execute that, yeah, we get this 409 error, and it gives us the error message that previously we got in NestJS. So yeah, this could be cleaned up a bit, but again, not outside the scope of this video. So that's kind of it on error handling. Again, you'll get like 4 or 5 minutes to do this yourself. And if there's any other questions, feel free to let me know. Okay, so we are going to the last topic, which is end-to-end testing. We might have to hurry a bit because we don't have much time, and there's another workshop right after this at like 2:45 CST. So again, I will show you everything, and then I'll try to give you as much time as possible. So yeah, let's just start. End-to-end testing is like testing your application as a whole. So it's kind of similar to the actual user interaction with your application. So we'll be testing the entire Nest application and all of the, basically, not all of them, a bunch of the API endpoints. So NestJS actually makes testing really fun because a lot of the patterns that we just saw with dependency injection and like decorators and stuff, like avoiding cross-cutting concerns, makes mocking things really much easier. And Nest also provides a lot of scaffolds for tests. So you saw like a bunch of the test files that we didn't really touch so far. We're actually going to be touching one of them now. So, and also it comes with Jest and super test out of the box. So for end-to-end testing, there's the test directory that we saw just a while ago. And the first thing we're going to do for setting to do testing is configure kind of the entire setup. So the way this is going to work is we are going to create a separate database for testing. And we're going to load up the environment for that in a file called .env.test. And here we're going to create a new database URL. And let's just call it NestJS workshop test. And since we're admins in the Postgres database we're running, it will just create that for us automatically. And if you're running SQL, you'll also have an alternative file that's in the Notion doc. We will need .env, which is this CLI tool. This will allow us to mention what env file to use. So yeah, we install .env as a dev dependency, and package.json has a test e2e command, and this is what we're going to modify to run our test. And this is going to be a bit of a long command. I'm just going to copy it first and then explain what it's doing, because I don't expect you to write this yourself. Just copy it. So yeah, this is a bit convoluted, but let's just walk through it. It's explained really nicely in the Notion doc. So right. So basically, the test has three parts, kind of. So the first one here, .env test whatever, it's basically telling to load the env test file instead of the normal .env file. And then we run Prisma migrate reset before set and skip seed. So basically, this will reset the database for us, clear up all the data. So it could be data from like the previous test or a failed test or whatever. And we don't want to seed any data. Then we will again run Jest, and Jest has this config. So basically two commands. One is the reset database part, and then we just run the test. So, and another thing we are going to do is set up module directories in the JSON config file for Jest. This is necessary for absolute import so that Jest knows where to look for the various kinds of libraries. So module directories, and we want two directories. One is the root directory and the other is node modules. And root is set as dot, so that means it's this test file. So we go back one directory up to that. So yeah, so then they'll be able to find, like, Jest will be able to find src and stuff. So now we can actually run the test file, because there is one dummy test there already. And it's testing the hello world. So the test is running, which is great. So now we're going to set up our database for the test. And we only really need to set up the database because the application is already running. And you can create like an app instance with this module fixture thing and initialize your entire NestJS inside your test, which is pretty awesome. So what we are going to do is, instead of before each, we're going to use before all, because it's going to be a bit faster and we don't need like for each for this really. And okay, so we are going to add some dummy data, and I will just copy paste the data. So 2 articles, we define everything really. And now we will need access to Prisma, like the Prisma service instance. And what's really cool is that, okay, let's just define it here. Okay, so Prisma will basically, so what NestJS allows you to do is any imports to the global app module, you can kind of get from this app instance, which is pretty awesome. So this will be the instance that's running inside this app thing, app reference module fixture. So the way you get that is you mention the type and you want the Prisma service. You just mention the like provider or service that you want. So yeah, okay. And we now have access to Prisma and we're going to use it to create the two articles. Prisma article.create data equals to articles data 0. And the reason we're running Prisma queries directly instead of like the post endpoint is because if there's bugs in the post endpoint, we can mess up other tests because of that. So yeah, so we just initialize some data for the tests. And we also need to do this another thing. I'm just gonna copy paste it. And right, so basically, you need to do this to get validation pipes and cross-validator running properly. And there's a Stack Overflow post that's mentioned inside the Notion document explaining what this is doing. It's kind of confusing in my opinion, but the gist is if you want validation to work properly inside your tests, when you're running like end-to-end tests, you got to do this thing. So I'm just doing that thing. And finally, we're going to create a matcher. Like a jest matcher that we will use to validate the data that's coming from like our API. So this is just like jest syntax. So we want an ID property. Its ID should be a number. We want a body property. Expect. Okay, we also want title. Okay, let's just title, created at, and updated at, title, body title, last one is published. Yeah, that. So there is, we're not going to do the other property, which is description because it's optional. So it's fine if it's not there. So we can use this matcher just in a bit. So that's kind of all the setup we need for our tests. And now let's on to like actually running the tests themselves. So, right. So the first thing we are going to do is test the get articles endpoint, and we can just get rid of this test. I'm not really using it. So let's just write this. So right, we can define multiple tests here. And okay, the first test is basically going to use the get/articles to return a list of published articles. The function it's going to run is this. And we are going to use super tests to actually run stuff. So okay, and we run a get command for the articles endpoint. Yeah, so that's basically super tests. It can write, it's good, really good for HTTP testing. And so we have a status and a body, and the body is ideally supposed to be an array of articles. So the status, let's match it to 200. We expect that the body will be an array containing, let me just write this down. Yeah, okay. So the body should be equal to an array containing article shape, and article shape is just a single article, right? And the body should have a length of 1 because we only created one published article. Yeah. So yeah, that's our first test. We're also going to create a similar test for the drafts endpoint. Oh, okay, let's just correct one more. Expect each entry should, the published value should be true. Okay, so let's basically do this, but to be falsy, because for drafts, yeah. So otherwise it should be the same, length should be 1, and let's try running these two tests. So we use npm run test e2e. Oops. Something is wrong. Unique constraint fails on the, geez. So it 54. Okay, let's try that one more time. Okay, how about I just don't mention the IDs? Okay, we're having some difficulties. So let's try to figure out what's going on. Okay, you know what? We don't have time. Let me just kind of copy paste some magic stuff down here from the document, because I don't think we'll be able to debug this and finish because we are running over time. Extremely sorry. Huh, okay, that fixed it. I have no idea what the difference is. Oh, wait, I think I know actually. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was creating the same article twice. So we went back, we didn't cheat. We're doing it for real. Okay, yeah, so our tests are passing. Let me show you just one more endpoint. This is for the post endpoint, but unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to give you time to implement this yourself. You're free to do it at the end of the workshop, but yeah. So let me just copy paste okay, so we're going to create another suit here. Right. Okay, you know what? I am getting requests to finish up, so let's just copy paste things a bit now. We're kind of cheap. So this is the, nope. Okay, so this is the articles tests, and what it does is kind of the same thing. So we check the number of articles that already exist, then we create an article, and we check the status is supposed to be 201, and there should be one more new article basically. So before and after should differ by 1. And we're also testing the failure case where if you try to create an article without title, it will fail and give you 400. And this is where validation pipe comes in. So if you didn't do this thing, this probably would have not worked properly, or it would have given like a 500 or something. So we don't have time to show you all the tests, but I think you get an idea, and you can probably figure out how to write the rest of the tests. That's kind of the end of this workshop, and I'm sorry I can't give you enough time to like implement this yourselves, but feel free to do it afterwards once we end the workshop. And just as a conclusion, I would suggest if you're new to NestJS, extending this application to add new things. The NestJS docs is amazing and gives you really detailed guides to do lots of things. So here's a few ideas in the final page that you could try, or you could try building something totally new. And there's also a few additional resources that I mentioned. There's a great GraphQL starter pack if you're into you want to try GraphQL, and there's also the workshop from last year which shows pagination and auth. So that's definitely something you want to do. And there's a really great testing repository in NestJS with a Prisma, dedicated Prisma like app example. And it shows you how to do not only end-to-end tests, but unit tests and all kinds of other stuff. And finally, in the Prisma blog, we are also doing a series on NestJS. Right now, it's only one article, and covered everything of this article in this workshop. It's not much in it for you, but in the future, we'll also cover a lot of cool stuff, like some of these things maybe. So that's all, folks. The workshop will be available on YouTube if there's something you missed and want to see again. It was wonderful to be able to do this with all of you. You were a great audience. There was lots of awesome questions. Thanks again for sticking through. And yeah, that will be all. I will stop my screen share.